to be able to present on behalf of Trinity Collaborative the 50th anniversary of Mayfest. I'm actually getting chills as I stand up and say 50, because what an amazing 50 years it has been. It's been 50 years filled with confetti eggs, live music, and great festival food. And I'm gonna be honest, that's the part that I miss the most. Seriously, I mean, I wanna follow this lady around and eat with her. Trinity Collaborative is a nonprofit organization that produces Mayfest, and we connect people to the parks, the river, and each other. And we all know that Fort Worth is ready to come back together and celebrate our amazing city through Mayfest. Mayfest is the gathering place of our beautiful and diverse city. From the college students who stroll along the banks of the Trinity River, to multi-generational families enjoying a carnival, and my favorite, a couple sitting back and enjoying an ice-cold craft beer at the Mayfest Beer Garden. Make plans to join us for the 50th anniversary of Mayfest, May 5th through May 8th in beautiful Trinity Park. Until then, you can find more information at mayfest.org or on our social media platforms, Mayfest FW and Mayfest. And when you go and take pictures, and you know you will because it's memories, please use our hashtags Mayfest FW 2022 and Mayfest FW 50 years. Now, if you're interested in Trinity Collaborative, please follow us at trinitycollaborative.org and Trinity Collaborative on our social media. Y'all have cookies and a parking pass. So please utilize these parking passes. On the back is directions, and you'll be getting tickets to be able to enter Mayfest. But soon you'll receive more information about the fantastic 50th anniversary plans and our grand opening. And I can promise you, you will not want to miss it. Until then, thank you all so much for the opportunity to come and talk about all things Mayfest, Fort Worth's favorite family festival. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Everybody's looking forward to it. We do not have any organizational updates or employee recognition, so I'll jump right to informal reports, and we do have a number of those. The first one is on the amendment to an economic development agreement with our nation's best sports. And Robert Stearns is available if there are any questions. All right, I'm rolling. Second one is Bel Air Drive South, reconfiguration of travel lanes and dedicated bike lanes. And Kelly Porter is available if there are any questions. All right, our third one is on emergency rental assistance, a program update, and Victor Turner is available if there are any questions. Keeping going. The next informal report is on a fleet services review, and Steve Cook is available if there's any questions.
Steve, I'll just ask you to come and summarize the IR on the record if you don't mind. Sorry about the cookie in my mouth.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. This is just an attempt for us to kind of do a self-audit of best practices for fleet things. We've had a lot of talk and questions in the past few months about some of the things that are going on in fleet, and we want to be sure we address that. And so we're going to find a national group that does this exclusively for fleet and have them tell us everything we need to know about fleet. And whatever we find out, we're going to try to implement those things. And if there's something we can react to, we will.
Use that as one of our criteria.
Okay, and so when would we use the best value as opposed to the lowest bidder?
So what we do in purchasing, if it's services or goods and services, that's when we recommend using best value. So you can take into consideration different things like delivery time, staffing, availability, all those things that the vendor can tell us about their company.
Okay, and that will be for all of the construction or all of the different types of projects listed
Yes,
here?
right.
And there's still not a way to do that for professional services?
State law, I believe, and we can check with the law department, but what I understand is professional services, you can only look at their qualifications under state law.
Okay. And so when we do best value, how are we going to codify? The purpose of it is to promote Fort Worth businesses without, these laws are put in place so people weren't grifting under the table. And so we're threading that needle. So how is the best value going to be codified in that when we go out for call for projects?
So the first thing we're going to do is put that in the ordinance so that we can actually use local preference as one of the items, because right now it doesn't say that you can do local preference with best value. And then when the departments go out for bid, they will give us the criteria they'd like to use, and we'd be recommending to include a local preference criteria.
Okay. Thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it. I think it's a really great step forward for our city to help promote from within. So thank you for all the work.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. Next informal report is the monthly development activity report, and DJ Harrell is available if there are any questions. He stood up. He was ready to come up. All right. The next informal report is a proposed update of the Stockyards form-based code and design guidelines. And Daniel Leal is available if there are any questions.
Not questions, but comments on that.
Mayor and Council, Daniel Leal and Justin Newhart.
Great. Thank you both for coming. And just for the purposes that members of our audience and everyone understands, to what extent, this amendment covers the Stockyards form-based code. This is something that we had discussed, Dana, and also discussed with some Stockyard stakeholders in light of the success of, current redevelopment of the Stockyards and the need to, do some updates to that existing plan. This only affects areas that pertain to the Swift Armor locations, correct, Justin?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. So multifamily, similar size, scope, can still occur north of, of the core of the Stockyards and also in the west?
Yeah, on the outer edges of the district, multifamily is still permitted, and in the historic core, it's allowed on the upper stories of existing buildings, which has traditionally been a historic use within the core.
Okay. And as far as our processes, I think you had mentioned to me that the UDC had already approved it unanimously. And where does it go from UDC to zoning?
It'll go to Zoning Commission next and then to you all for final approval.
Okay. Well, that's all I have. Again, thank you for the work, making sure that the Stockyards continues to develop, in an orderly manner and as it should. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. The next informal report is on water bill pay options and enhancements. And Mr. Environment, Chris Harder, is available if there are any questions. Yeah, Mr. Environment.
You got a new title.
All right. The next informal report is the January 2022 sales tax update, and Mark McAvoy is available if there are any questions. All right, I'm rolling. The next informal report is on the aquatic master plan update, and Richard Zavala is available if there are any questions.
Come on up, Richard. Hi there.
Hi.
How are you?
Outstanding.
Great. Maybe just start with a summary about what this IR is focused on, if you don't mind.
Yes, yeah. Richard Zavala, Park and Recreation Department. IR 22059 provides a background on the citywide aquatics master plan that was originally adopted by the City Council in 2008 and amended and serves as our current plan in 2012. Further, that we plan on doing a refresh or an update to that 20-year plan during fiscal year 23. The decision to refresh the plan was really based on the community interest that we received during the formulation of the 22 bond program, which I need to say early voting begins on April 25th and the election is on May 7th. But there was a lot of interest in Forest Park Pool, and as a result of that, the city manager recommended and the council approved expansion of the scope and the funding for both the Forest Park Pool renovation and the Stop 6 Aquatics facility. those two facilities in the $124 million Proposition B for park and recreation improvements make up 16% of our funding in the 22 bond program, and enable us to replace Forest Park with an 8-lane, 50-meter pool, the bathhouse, recreational elements, and Stop 6, the scope grew for it as well. It will have recreational elements within that pool, but we're expanding it from a 4-lane to an 8-lane, 25-yard pool. So the good news is these are the first two pools that have been included in a bond program since the adoption of the master plan in 2012. In accordance with that plan and recommendations from the Park Board, we submitted two pools in each the 14 and 18 bond program. Other priorities prevailed and they were not funded. So this discussion is really good news that we're able to move forward with these two facilities in the 22 bond program. We will conduct the master plan process during fiscal 23. We will engage the Park Board, which will ultimately begin and end with them and then come to you. But we'll engage the community, the stakeholders, special interest groups and neighborhoods, just like we did in the development of the first plan. The only thing that I would add is with the 22 bond program, we have 7 master plans to do for parks, including 3 community parks. And then we have special use facilities, including the water gardens and about $7.2 million in drainage way improvements that we have to do. So to hit our mark within 5 years of completing all those projects, master plans for Echo Lake and Oak Grove Park and Gateway Park, some pretty significant parks, have to be completed for us to be able to get the community input, do the design, bid out the projects, and get them completed, just like we are for the 2018 bond program. So our focus will be a refresh on the AMP update and get us through the next 10 years. It's going to be updating it as to what has the market done, what changes we have, and actually we'll make an adjustment to our base pool that was in the current adopted plan, the enhanced family aquatic facility to the modified aquatic facility that will match up with the Stop 6 pool. So that's the plan. We hope to be back to you at the end of the in the fourth quarter, the end of the calendar year in 23.
That's helpful, Richard. So simple math, in 2007, when you did the aquatics master plan, the city was operating 7 pools, is that correct?
Yes, in 2007, we did an assessment of the 7 pools that we were operating, and that determined that all 7 pools needed to be replaced. They were outdated and pretty much exceeded their useful life.
And we currently own and operate how many pools today, including the McDonald Y?
McDonald Y is a partnership with the YMCA. We contributed $2.3 million. They built an enhanced neighborhood family aquatic facility. We also have the Marine Park Pool. That was the first one done after the adoption of the plan. That was funded with Community Development Block Grant Funds, so it was cash funded for $3.8 million, and it opened in 2013. And then at the same time, Mike Radler with the Radler Foundation invested $500,000 in Forest Park Pool. And in a sense, it was a Band-Aid. We replaced the liner, but all the important infrastructure to the pool, the piping, the pumps, none of that was replaced. Those were replaced in 1965, so they're over 50 years old.
Mm-hmm. So you currently have Marine Park, the McDonald Y, and you have Forest Park.
And Forest Park.
Okay. And the reason I'm asking these questions is actually a thank you. I know how hard you've worked and advocated, and you put the master plan in place. We didn't include them in the bond for those 4 years running, and I think sometimes parks has been unfairly characterized as anti-pool. I know that's not the case, and that it's going to take a lot of advocacy around this table and partnerships to help catch us up where we need to be. I think the update is the right way to go. So I just really wanted you to go through that and say thank you, and we'll do our best to help advocate with all these different needs that you have as a parks department, as a fast-growing city, but we have to include pools and aquatics as a priority because we've heard that really clearly from constituents. So we appreciate you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Next informal report is on a proposed council-initiated zoning change for certain properties located in the Monticello neighborhood in Council District 7. And Daniel Liel is available if there are any questions.
If I could, Daniel. Hi there. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Beth is here as
Beth
well,
is
I
here as
see.
well, good night.
Just wanted to, now, seeing you, Beth, thank you for all your hard work on this on behalf of the association and the neighborhoods. You just did a fantastic job, so thank you for taking us through that and taking them through that. We did want to, one request would be to modify the IR, and I'd like you to take a look at that if you would, to basically extend the B zoning up through the 3608 West 5th block for a couple special reasons in that block, on that block. If we could do that, I'd appreciate it. Otherwise, I think we're in great shape.
Okay, all right. And then we'll amend the resolution as well.
We will include that in the resolution.
Okay.
So I guess the timeline remains the same.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't go far.
Yep.
The next informal report is on a proposed council-initiated zoning change for certain properties located in the Highland Hills neighborhood in Council District 8. Okay, now you're good. Thank you. And the final informal report is an update on the fiscal year 2022 mid-year adjustments for operating PIDs and the tourism PID. And Robert Stearns is available if there are any questions. Mayor, that concludes my report.
Awesome, thanks, David. Our first item is questions regarding city council action items for next week. Is there anything on the agenda or concerns coming up? Okay. Any significant zoning cases that you want to bring up to city management right now prior to next week? Okay. So presentation in partnership with UNT Health Science. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Carlos.
There is one, Mayor. It was Mr. Leo. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, probably the most significant one, and it's still, playing out in the sense that the alliances are still meeting with the applicant. They, just as recent as today, they asked me to meet up with them as well to keep this very short and sweet. This proposed car wash is in the way of an emergency spillway. That presents problems at the local and state level. TRWD is involved in discussing matters with their engineer, and more to be determined thereafter. So, I'll keep staff informed as what we find out, but that will be problematic, in this case.
Yeah, I understand.
That's it.
Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we get to go to UNT Health Science Center partnership. I think Valerie Washington is going to kick us off. Is that correct, Val? Okay.
Come on this side, it gets easier. Good afternoon, Mayor, Council, City Manager. I was going to do a quick intro as my guests made it up to the podium, but they were really quick. So I'll make this intro quick as well, just to set up this conversation. And I would say community health has been on all of our radars as we've navigated through a pandemic. And we've been forced to address community health impacts, especially as we've looked at access to healthcare, doctors, testing, vaccines. And it's really created an opportunity for us to talk more about health equity as well. And I'm really proud to have David Mansdorfer and I wrote it down because everyone knows I'm terrible with names. Noah Drew, I knew I was going to get it backward and say Drew Noah, here from the UNT Health Science Center to show that we're ready to put energy and action behind addressing health disparities and having health conversations in our communities. And we want to work to create forums where we can listen, better understand health concerns of residents. And there's really no better group to do that with than the experts at UNT Health Science Center, where we have Chancellor Michael Williams, we have Admiral Sylvia Trent Adams, we have tons of health and science expertise behind us. And we think of all the top opportunities, and David will talk more about this in his presentation. But just an example that I know gets me excited at the possibility is looking at the UNT Health Science Center, who's looking at infant mortality, partnering with the fire chief and neighborhood services. So our fire department, they're in homes every single day. They have opportunities to really make some of those observations and potentially help give good information to moms and who are pregnant. Here in the city of Fort Worth, our moms belong to the highest category of women who do not get prenatal care. So as we learn information like that, we have opportunities to use the health experts in our fire department, the social workers we have, and expertise through neighborhood services to really work with the UNT Health Science Center and make some positive change. So with that, I turn it over to David to go through his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, for all those who've worked with me in the past, you know I'm very quick to action. So jumping up here a little quicker than I'm wanted is sometimes just a benefit of that. But this conversation today, first off, my name is David Mansdorfer. I'm Special Assistant to the President, now Chancellor, right, at the UNT system, Michael Williams. I also work hand in hand with Admiral Sylvia Trent Adams, former acting U.S. Surgeon General, who's kind enough to join us at the Health Science Center as well, too. And the conversation today really is a culmination of multiple conversations that we as organizations have had really since the beginning of COVID around a lot of things. As you all remember, you know, HSC partnered with the city on one of the first testing sites around first responders, right? And so we got we'd always historically had a great working relationship, but that was a really good project that we could come together in a time of need and start working on something. And so as we got a little more comfortable, you know, HSC being out in the community more than it had historically, Chancellor Williams, then President Williams at the time, really started to emphasize we need to be out in the community more, and we need to do more, and we need to really get integrated with local government and our public health partners, because when you think about public health, right, you think about, you know, your local government, you think about academic health science centers, and you think about hospital systems and other things like that. So our goal was to build a collaborative relationship that expanded on the work that was already happening between both of our organizations. And so really kind of to start off, you know, collaborating for our community. Our goals are aligned. HSC's goal is to create solutions for a healthier community, you know, much in the same ways that I know that is a driving goal of what the city of Fort Worth does. And, you know, how does that look? That includes public health education and training, health literacy, research, and most importantly, service, right, at the end of the day. And so as we were putting together an MOA about how we could be collaborative and increase the effectiveness of the public health programming here in Fort Worth and even within the DFW area, our goals were kind of put out into specific buckets. One was to increase federal resources dedicated to public health issues in Fort Worth. So as many of you all know, when it comes to grants, you know, there are certain things that local government can apply for. There are certain things that academic health science centers can apply for, but you tend to be stronger the more partners you bring to the table. And so when we were looking at grants, and I know it came up specifically when HSC applied for our new $50 million a year Aim Ahead grant on machine learning and artificial intelligence, we reached out to the city, and very quickly that collaborative working relationship, we're able to get a partnership letter that helped HSC be competitive in that space. And so but we didn't really have a formal mechanism to do that. It was kind of a relationship thing that we had been doing, and it worked very well. So our first goal was to increase federal resources. The second is to improve specific health outcomes for Fort Worth residents, right? You know, so if you talk about equity and disparities, you can go out and you can really take the data and look at some of the top disparities and equity issues are here in Fort Worth. Cardiovascular issues, you know, even things as simple as teaching CPR, right, can significantly enhance a community's ability to have longer lifetime when it comes to things like heart attacks. Opioids, the number of times that I've talked with both Chief Noakes and Chief Davis about saturating things like Narcan, which HSC ran a big program on right before COVID in 2020, is to find ways to get Narcan into the community to help alleviate opioid overdose. And then obviously there's the access to the care through upstream interventions. When you talk about the most cost-effective way to deal with health issues is prevention, right? So you catch it before it becomes an issue. And so really increasing access to care through upstream interventions. Another notion that when I got here from DC about 2.5 years ago was the notion to operationalize public health. Public health historically, we are very theoretical in public health sometimes. We really get to a point where like, these are good outcomes. We talk a lot about what the good outcomes is. But now that I have a former acting U.S. Surgeon General sitting in the office next to me, our goal is to operationalize public health, which is to really make sure that when we talk about something, we create the programs and plans and analysis of what's working and not working so we can actually see the impact of what we're doing on a daily basis. And at the back end of it is to address the disparities and equity issues. And I know Dr. J.K. Viswanatha is part of your Human Relations Commission Subcommittee on Health Disparities. So finding ways to enhance the already collaborative partnerships that we have today. And so with that, I will turn it over to my partner, Noah Drew, who will talk specifically about some of the areas and the benefits of this partnership.
Thank you, David, Mayor, council members. So talking a little bit about the big picture operationalization of this plan and partnership, really the thing that comes to the forefront is the ability to communicate with each other in a formal way. We know that we've been tactically working on different public health issues individually, but through setting up a formal structure to work with each other, we want to anticipate needs, identify where we're working, and then also see opportunity around the corner so that we can work together smarter. As we want to increase the number of good health outcomes for our community, we know that we each have trusted partners that we work with, and when working with the community, trust is one of those underpinning guidelines that helps us get the work done. So the city has partners, the Health Science Center has partners. We can help each other leverage those relationships, make them stronger, and form new ones together through this partnership. Knowing that we want to pursue some tactical opportunities for programmatic impact. David mentioned already the opportunity to partner together on federal funding opportunities. Having this MOU in place will signify to funders that we're serious about in changing the health outcomes for the city. And then lastly, just making sure that we're taking a data-driven approach. The Health Science Center is a strong leader in the area of public health research in general, and we know that there are different data sets the city has through its public safety offices that would benefit the Health Science Center and its ability to explain what's going on, what we're seeing, perhaps explain some of the health outcomes that we're seeing and develop actionable plans for positive change. Getting a little bit more tactical in terms of what we are going to start doing, we want to look at the data and do a needs analysis that builds on the existing body of work. We want to make sure that as we're doing this work, we're not being duplicative. We want to be additive to the situation. We want to examine what behaviors exist, look at the possible recommendations for intervention, and then move forward together. Looking at the health literacy aspect of all of this, helping people advocate for themselves and their own health needs, identify valid resources, identify valid sources of information, and be able to articulate that to healthcare providers and work through us as trusted partners to influence their own health plan is very important. We have the expertise that will help the city be able to do that. And then lastly, being able to look at environmental health hazards. So from the public health standpoint, being able to help the city understand what hazards may exist, what potential problematic outcomes could result from different events, and then help put a plan forward to alleviate the possible harmful outcomes as we go forward. So very next steps, next week, April 12th, we're inviting city leadership, Chief Noakes, Chief Davis to come in and talk about some of the city's priorities for public health interventions. What are some of the things that you're currently working on? How can we support you? What expertise do we need to garner and gather to help move this collaboration forward? And then start to regularly share opportunities for collaboration as the partnership evolves and continues to expand. So Val, if we have any questions or if there's an opportunity for comment, happy for that now.
Thank you. The one thing I did want to just add to this presentation is that we're specifically spotlighting the City of Fort Worth UNT Health Science Center collaboration and relationship because we've entered into an MOA with them I want to make it clear that we're not excluding work with Tarrant County Public Health and other community organizations. This particular presentation was just spotlighting our specific relationship, and some of those other conversations, of course, there are other stakeholders at the table. And with that, I think the group is ready for questions or comments. Thank you.
Questions, council? No? I think this is a really exciting step. Obviously, COVID brought out a lot of maybe deficiencies from the city and where we need to be better partners. And to your point, Val, it's not excluding Tarrant County, but the city of Fort Worth needs to have a set of priorities, and we need to be better informed with the work at Health Science Center. So I'm excited about working with y'all on this. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have a briefing on proposed allocation of federal funds from the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA.
Good afternoon. I'm Tony Russo, Financial Management Services. I'm just going to provide a brief update on the ARPA funding to date. So the city's allocation was $173.7 million. We received half of that in May of last year. We expect to receive the second half in May of this year. The U.S. Treasury provided guidance on the uses, and all projects are approved by Mayor and Council through an M&C. So you can see we've currently allocated $98.3 million, which leaves an remaining amount to be allocated of $75.4 million. We will have to come back to council on two M&Cs, the CDFI Friendly America and the Convention Center expansion. We just have to change some wording based upon the funding section that we're using, so nothing else changes. It's based upon updated guidance provided by the Treasury. Nothing else will change with those M&Cs, just the language change on the funding sections. So we have another planned use of $47.5 million, which leaves a remaining allocation of $27.8 million. Immediately following this presentation, you'll see presentations for Permanent Supportive Housing and Center for Transforming Lives with M&Cs to follow next week. There's 3 M&Cs projected for the end of this month with IT-related projects, and then there's 3 other projects that we're waiting for more details in producing the M&C. So one of the available uses for ARPA is to replace lost revenue. So in the replacement of lost revenue can be used in general government services. Good example of that would be a project that we had that was put on hold or severely impacted by the pandemic. For example, like the Convention Center renovation is a good example of that. That was delayed and affected by the pandemic. So we calculated a revenue recovery amount of $86.7 million, and currently we have plans to spend that entire amount. However, we're looking at the planned uses here to see if we can redistribute some of that to the non-recovery section. So that may change in the future. So some eligible, the categories for the eligible expenditures under non-revenue are responding to the public health emergency. So this would be things like the testing and vaccination sites, things like that. Responding to negative economic impacts, and some of this would be like the child care, the affordable housing, the homelessness initiative, things like that would fall into this category. And with this, you have to prove that there's an economic impact, a negative economic impact, excuse me. But if individual households or communities with a medium impact below 65,880 for a household of 3, we can presume there's an impact. And then for individual households or communities with a medium impact below 40,626 for households of 3, we can presume there's a disproportionately impacted, which means they're considered severely impacted by it. And the last category is necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure, and these will be things like the IT projects, some of the IT projects that you'll see later on. So the next steps for allocating the remaining $27.8 million are, again, we'll look at the non-revenue recovery. We're going to look at the categories, and there might be some available in the revenue recovery. But the city departments will work internally. They can work externally with outside agencies and entities and develop potential uses for the projects. They can submit projects to FMS through April 20 through the end of this month, and then Financial Management Services will determine eligibility, working with our outside consultant, and projects that are determined eligible will be discussed with the city manager's office for consideration and priority, and then the city manager's office will make recommendations to council based upon priority. Like I said, quick. Any questions? Or?
I don't have a question, maybe more of a comment, and this might divert back to David, that I know we are closely coordinating with Tarrant County on their distribution of ARPA funds wherever possible. So anything you want to add to that, David, for anybody that's got questions?
So the answer is yes. What we're trying to communicate with outside agencies is, and we've heard from a number of them already, we have $27.87 million left of the ARPA that's not been committed. So what we're asking people to do is, now's the time to let us know about those projects that you think is eligible for the ARPA money under the definition that Tony talked about. We already have more requests than $27.87 million. So we have to go through a process of how we're going to prioritize all those different requests for the money. And what we're going to look to do is leverage as much of other people's money along the way in a partnership opportunity. So we want those partnerships with whether it's not-for-profits in the community or the county or others.
Thank you. Any other questions, council? No? Thank you for the update. Now no, sorry. I guess we're going to move, sorry, they're categorized. Now we're going to have Tara Perez, Neighborhood Services. Sorry, Tara, talk about permanent supportive housing.
Tara Perez with Neighborhood Services. Thank you, Mayor, Council, City Manager. So this is a complicated slide because it's talking about 3 different types of housing with requests from 3 different entities with 2 different funding sources. So I wanted to spend a little time to walk through it. So Tarrant County Homeless Coalition, on behalf of the homeless system, shelters, housing providers, etc., has made a request. What they've looked at is looking at our homeless population now, historically and tentatively forecasting what kind of housing do we need to make a really significant impact on reducing homelessness. So they've broken it into 3 categories to match different populations. The first is permanent supportive for chronically homeless. As y'all know, that's limited to people who are disabled and homeless longer than a year. So the area need is about 222, whereas our Fort Worth need is 162 of that. The next category is for folks that are disabled, but they haven't been homeless longer than a year. And then the last category is for people who are literally homeless. That's people in our shelters or outside, but they may not have a disability. They may not be homeless longer than a year. This is a lot of kind of our families. In the first 2 categories, it's a lot of individuals and some couples. So they've broken down the request on Fort Worth, Arlington, and Tarrant County. And the 2 funding sources they've requested are Home ARP, which is through HUD, and then General ARPA. So this is where our status is. Earlier, the city of Fort Worth committed our Home ARPA funding and some other sources, including some Directions Home and HFC funding for permanent supportive housing. And now there is an ask today, there's an M&C routing for $5 million of General ARPA. What that will do is provide enough permanent supportive housing for chronically homeless in the city of Fort Worth. The county has made a commitment of $32.5 million. They are still looking at what categories they're going to put their money in, which one of these three. And then the third is deeply affordable. There are lots of considerations and conversations happening now. In speaking with Arlington, they are leaning toward allocating their PSH to home ARPA, but they're not going to make formal decisions until the summer. Okay, this is what's happening now, that there's a notification of funding availability out now, and this is a public-private partnership. Local philanthropic foundations have written a letter pledging the $2.55 million match, and they are selecting a score to be on the scoring committee. Once city staff recommends projects, the foundations will meet among themselves and divide up to make sure they have matching funds for every project. So what's already happened is $15.3 million has been committed. This is enough to build 125 units. The request today is for an additional $5 million. This will put us at our goal that Tarrant County Homeless Coalition has requested for permanent supportive housing in the city of Fort Worth. As I mentioned, the notification of funding availability is out. It's actually due Friday. And those will be scored with city staff and foundations. This is our timeline. And these are the next steps. So the M&C is April 12th. We're looking at if the $5 million allocation for PSH passes, that amount would be awarded to PSH projects. We would do a presentation before council on June 7th, individually talking about hopefully 3 or 4 projects in different areas, and then June 14th would be a vote on those specific projects. Any questions?
Elizabeth. Thank you. First of all, Tara, thank you for everything you do, and thank you for everything you've done to navigate this ARPA process. I know that you've worked really close with Tarrant County and our partnering cities to make sure that we're collaborating, and we're doing this in a way that is most effective of our taxpayer dollars and most impactful on our homeless community. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. That $5 million is big, and I appreciate everyone at the table who allocated that funds. We've been pushing for it for a while, and I think it's going to be huge for our city, and I'm really proud of us for taking that step. So when we go back to your slide that talked about the bigger ask and the deeply affordable, the literally homeless, can you give us an example of what you mean by what it looks like for a family to be literally homeless and what that, so we know when we're talking about potentially funding this deeply affordable housing, who are we housing there? I think the other two are pretty easy for us to wrap our brains around, but what does that look like to be literally homeless?
Okay. So we asked about this because we needed to get some estimates for housing type, because it's probably different. A lot of our permanent supportive, its efficiencies are 1 bedrooms. So this is a little bit different type of housing that we're looking at. And so when we looked at who would this be targeted to in the homeless system, obviously there's a spectrum. Some families get out on their own. Some families we can pay $2,000 move-in fees and they're fine. But we have some families in our system that they may not need case management, but they're going to need longer-term rental assistance, because a lot of this homelessness is economic. In permanent supportive, we've got a lot of health issues and sometimes other issues going on. But this is primarily economic. So when we looked at this group, about a third were families that would be assisted, but with the average family size of 3.5, the actual number of people in families would be more than the number of individuals. So it kind of breaks down into what this looks like is some older individuals and then some families.
Okay, and so when you say deeply affordable housing, is that similar or akin to the type of housing developments that we've seen recently push through council, for example, the Tobias Place that we just approved in District 9. Is that the type of housing that we're talking about, or is it something different?
So this is looking at housing that's affordable to 0 to 30 AMI households, average median income households.
So this would not be the 4% or 9% tax credit type deals that we typically are.
I believe as part of the tax credit policy that 10% of the units have to be deeply affordable, which is that 0 to 30 AMI. But this, we're talking about all deeply affordable.
So I guess my question is, are these the type of projects that could also go after tax credits, or is this the type of project that would need to be funded in some other mechanism? I'm trying to get an idea for when we go back a couple of slides, we talked about leveraging on partnerships and funding. And so if we're going to push to put ARPA funds there, I kind of want to get a better idea of, is this a situation where we're partnering with the Housing Finance Corporation like we have in other projects to get this deeply affordable, or is this its own animal?
Okay, so the caveat is I've begun that conversation, particularly around the 4% tax credits. Again, my area of expertise is not housing tax credits, but from my understanding, a lot of those 9% deals, why there is a requirement to have 10% 0 to 30 is because they can't withstand that much 0 to 30. The project can't handle that much. So this is a little bit different.
So this would be to maybe.
It's just aimed at a much lower income.
Okay, thank you.
Michael?
I'll just back up what Councilwoman Beck said too. I'm obviously supportive of all the efforts that you do and Lauren and everything that you're doing with Tarrant County Homeless Coalition, but I think we have to continue to look at how we leverage these partnerships. And these aren't solely just the city of Fort Worth problems, they're county and other cities. So I'm happy to see these numbers up here that other people are willing to play and put some of their funds up. But we have to continue that with we have to collaborate with anything that we do to make sure that we're using our funds wisely, is also asking other entities to do it as well.
Exactly. I had a conversation with one foundation. I was asking them about matching our permanent supportive housing projects, and they weren't that interested. It didn't fit in their scope. However, they're very interested in deeply affordable. And so my understanding is that the Homeless Coalition has already applied for some foundation matching funds for the deeply affordable.
Looks great, Tara. Thank you very much for the update. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Hold on. iPad died. There we go. And now we have Robert Stearns. Yes? Hi, Robert.
Afternoon, Mayor, members of council. Robert Stearns, Economic Development. Today I want to talk to you about a proposal that we've been discussing for several months with the Center for Transforming Lives. This will be a new campus at a site in Southeast Fort Worth. We do have Kara Klossick here with Center for Transforming Lives, so she can answer any detailed questions you may have about the proposal. But we've been discussing this for several months, and kind of speaking of the discussion you just had about partnerships with other agencies, this is one that Tarrant County has been deeply involved with as well. Really what CTL is proposing is a new centralized campus for programming and services. And this is really to address the ongoing disparities that have been caused by the pandemic, particularly as it relates to access to childcare and workforce mobility. So this proposal would have the development of a campus building and settings that would really provide programs for low to moderate income women and families in need of increased housing stability, affordable quality childcare, increased economic security, and improved mental health. So the site is one that you all are probably very familiar with. This is the old Montgomery Wards there at Berry and Riverside, so at 2851 South Riverside. This site has been vacant for an extended period of time. Developer Michael Malik owned the property for a while and was trying to have some development activity. But this is one that we have been working for several years and trying to attract new investment. As I stated, the location is within Southeast Fort Worth, one of our high poverty areas. And what CTL is proposing is an adaptive reuse of that structure, restoring both the building and the surrounding land to create this hub for services and economic opportunity. So here, just to orient you to the site, again, this is East Berry, so off to your left over here would be I-35. Here's Riverside. These are the Sierra Vista apartments. Here is the building, the existing building itself. And if you recall, this used to be the side of the old parole office that was put together there at the corner. Here you'll see a site plan of the overall concept. So again, the building, the adaptive reuse of the building here, and we'll show some images so you can see what those designs look like. They do have a space here, so they're talking about taking the former space that was a parole office and converting that into a space for some of their entrepreneurs that could be developed out of the existing center here. So you got the main entry going into a nice courtyard, space for retail, donation drop-offs, and a trade school, and then here are the primary offices and services space. So here's just an elevation looking, I believe we're actually probably looking off of Berry, looking directly at the site. Here's just some of the interiors of the site as you're heading into the building. The walkway, the courtyard, which is within the facility itself. And then this overlay, which again has the roof off, but you see the locations here for the trade school, drop-off station, additional retail opportunities here, the courtyard in here, the offices and services, which would be in this area of the facility. So the program really has 4 overall objectives that they're trying to achieve as part of this development. One is improve access to healthcare. So this new facility will offer care for up to 120 children, including those who qualify for Head Start or Early Head Start, as well as traditional child care. The second will be improved access to behavioral health care. So CTL will have their healthcare providers licensed through Medicaid and CHIP on site, and they will offer state-of-the-art therapeutic spaces for child therapy. Expanded workforce development opportunities. So as part of this, and I mentioned they will be developing a new economic mobility center, which will be within the facility, which will offer free drop-in childcare so that women can attend classes, interviews, and coaching services without childcare serving as a barrier to accessing those services. And then this mobility center will also offer space for business coaching and counseling, education, incubator, and accelerator services. So it really is trying to encapsulate a lot of services for the impacted communities. That CTL is also talking about discussing establishing a small business fund for entrepreneurs that will assist those companies that they will be working with at the site. So here is a breakout of the project budget. So you see it's just under $32 million for the overall project, consisting of the property acquisition, building improvements, and then the professional services tied into the site. Their funding is really broken down. So as I said, this is a partnership that we're working on with Tarrant County. Tarrant County has committed $3.25 million in Arpa funding for the project. The request before you today would be for $3 million of Arpa. The foundation for CTL is raising another $3 million. They have a significant private fundraising ask that's ongoing right now. They'll also access the New Market Tax Credit Program, and then they will sell their current facility, which is downtown, which will go into the proceeds to help the project move forward. So the county funding of this development will be allocated specifically toward the property acquisition portions of the project. The city funding that we're discussing today would be allocated towards eligible expenses associated with the construction of the core and the building improvements. So basically, we're going to be reimbursing them for eligible expenses tied to the construction of the site. The first payment would be from our FY22 Arpa funds, second payment of 1.5 from our FY23 Arpa funds, totaling $3 million totals. And this project would leverage just over $25 million in additional funding sources, primarily private and fundraising. And the facility itself is expected to open in 2024. So our recommendation would be to enter into agreement with the Center for Transforming Lives, or CTL, that would make available $3 million in total from ARPA, 1.5 from FY22 and 1.5 from FY23. And we actually will have an M&C that is routing and should be on the council agenda on April 12th. So I can answer any questions. And as I said, Carol is here to fill in any gaps that I may have missed.
No, you said, is Carol here?
Yes, yes.
Where is she? I don't see her. There you are. Hi. I don't have any tough questions, Carol. I'm just really proud this has come to fruition. You guys have done an incredible amount of work. You kind of set the standard on what a project partnership should look like for us, both in blended model of funding and what careful due diligence you did before this. If you don't already have a relationship with Richard Zavala and Parks, I hope y'all will, because I think the open space component of this development, at least have the conversation and know what partnership could be possible there. But very, very exciting. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It's really, really exciting for us, and I was hearing about the dollars earlier and the allocation. Our Center for Transforming Lives primarily is serving families with household incomes under $20,000 a year. And we stabilize them and get them on their way toward economic opportunity. So really appreciate tremendously the support and excited about how this is coming together.
Thank you. Council, any other questions? Chris, go ahead.
Yes, I'll have a couple of comments. First, wanted to say thank you for bringing this. Robert didn't have it in this slide, but it's in District 8. Thank you, Robert.
I thought you'd pick up on that, Councilmember.
Yeah. No, I don't. Are you leaving District 9?
I live in District 9.
No, leaving.
I mean,
The center?
leaving, yes.
Okay.
We are no longer.
It's okay. It's okay. I remember when I first got onto council, and I think one of the first votes, it was part of this project. Well, not this project, it was that location, and I denied the zoning change to allow a self-storage to come. And today, I can honestly say I'm grateful that I did deny that zoning change, because this type of development, those of you who have ever come through District 8, the historical south side of Riverside area, also the 76104 area that has the lowest life expectancy in all of the state of Texas, this type of development gives us hope. It brings strength, it brings sunlight to the community, and it will give us an opportunity to take care of some of the other blighted motels and hotels that we need to take care of really soon before these beautiful, awesome children come and take place in that open space. And so I am excited that I get a chance to play a part. I was able to visit the site by UTA. They do a phenomenal job. It is world class. And so I'm excited that it's coming to District 8. So thank you. And anything that we can do as a city or me personally, please don't hesitate. Let us know.
Thanks very much, Councilman.
Awesome. Thank y'all very, very much.
Thank you.
And I think our last presentation related to ARPA is with Kevin Gunn to talk about broadband and Wi-Fi expansion.
All right, good afternoon, Mayor Parker, council members, Mr. City Manager. I am Kevin Gunn. I'm the IT Solutions Department Director. I'm happy today to give you an update on our community Wi-Fi program. This program predates some of your tenure here on the council, so I wanted to take a step back and give you an overview of how the program came about before giving you an update on where we're at with the program. And I wanted to start it with just a few definitions. So there's a lot of talk about broadband and Wi-Fi, especially since the federal government has come out with some funding for states and eventually municipalities like the city of Fort Worth to make investments in broadband. So what is broadband? Essentially, it's high capacity transmit and receive of data, voice, and video services, right? And what does the high capacity mean? Well, that's a bit of a moving target too, right? I can remember back in the 90s when we had 36K kilobit modems that we would dial up AOL, and that was really fast. And then the 56 kilobit modems came out. And then the DSL at 750 kilobits came out. And then there was the T1. And so you get my drift here, that high capacity is a moving target, and as the technology evolves, the users create new uses for the technology and take up all of the available bandwidth. So for our purposes, broadband just means that highest capacity of technology that's available. Wi-Fi is wireless technology. So you can use Wi-Fi to access broadband communications that may or may not be connected to the internet, but most people are familiar with Wi-Fi connecting to their home internet service provider. And that's really where the distinction is. So broadband versus internet, broadband is really the capacity of transmitting that information to and from the internet. Wi-Fi is just the technology where the end user connects to that internet. All right, so the community Wi-Fi program came out of our emergency response to the COVID-19 pandemic. As we switched to digital service delivery here at the city to support social distancing and preventing the spread of COVID-19, we also created some aid programs that people could apply for to help offset loss of income or loss of revenue for their small business. And we had a digital application process for those, and we weren't seeing the type of adoption or application rate for those programs that we were expecting, so we wanted to dig into that and understand why. And we found a distinct lack of data out there about internet access. There isn't a lot of good information out there, but one source that we could find that was reputable was the U.S. Census American Communities Survey. So this is a product that comes in between the decennial census taking. They ask questions about lots of stuff, but some of the aspects are American home life and some of the things that families have in their homes. And we found through looking at that data that there are portions of community that have great internet access at home. There are portions that don't have great internet access at home. In fact, 30,000 households in Fort Worth don't have home internet access. 25 additional on top of that 30,000 don't have broadband internet access, so that high-speed internet access at home. So we wanted to fill in or bridge that gap for the families in our community, and we started brainstorming ways to do that, and we came up with the idea that we have internet access available in all of the public areas of our buildings. If we could have a way to extend that from our public buildings into the surrounding neighborhoods, we could help families have better access to the internet. So that's what we did. The next challenge was, out of all the areas of need, how do we identify where we could best invest our limited resources? So we had some CARES funds that were allocated to the City of Fort Worth. We wanted to use some of those funds to improve internet access. Those funds weren't unlimited, but we wanted to make the biggest benefit out of those limited resources. And we had already established a neighborhood improvement program where we make public investments in areas of the city that are struggling, that are underserved areas historically, and we collect metrics on those things, metrics such as educational attainment, median income, median housing price, life expectancy, road conditions, and use that information to decide which of these communities are struggling and how can we help those communities have a better quality of life by making some public investments. So overall, you know, in that program, we were looking at quality of life initiatives, improving public safety, improving the physical assets, streets, sidewalks, street lighting, those sorts of things, increasing community engagement. And longer term, we wanted to help those neighborhoods turn the corner and begin improving their quality of life and showing positive trends in those metrics instead of the negative trends we were seeing. And improving access to internet connectivity aligned perfectly with those goals, right? So we saw a high correlation between the metrics that indicated the neighborhood was struggling and the metrics that showed they didn't have access to internet at home. So we included our Wi-Fi, community Wi-Fi program as part of that neighborhood improvement program, and we went back to the neighborhoods that we had already visited, and you see them listed there: Stop 6, Ash Crescent, Northside, Rosemont, and Como, and deployed that community Wi-Fi in those neighborhoods. And there's great benefits in doing that. So like I said, we saw a high correlation between the lack of internet access and those communities that are in the neighborhood improvement program. We felt like we could improve their quality of life and do it rather quickly by having better internet access in those communities, in those neighborhoods, because that internet access supports things like remote education, which kids were struggling with, employment search, remote work, things like telemedicine and other community services that were being delivered digitally. I want to highlight that we are offering the same quality of service through our wireless, community wireless program as we're offering in our libraries and community centers and other public areas of our buildings. It's the same service because we're just extending what we had there. And long-term, we see this as a bridge to more widely available wired broadband internet access. And I emphasize wired because internet access is an infrastructure challenge. It's a challenge that's similar to roadways and water, wastewater utility, and electric utility, and gas utility, right? It's an infrastructure challenge. It's a longer-term challenge to solve, especially if you're talking wired access. And the reason I emphasize wired access because that is a way to future-proof that investment. Wireless technology has a very quick life cycle. So the life cycles for wireless technology evolve very rapidly, and the industry changes very quickly. It's a challenge to put equipment out there and then come back and replace it as those technologies evolve. Wired access is a little more stable and also tends to be higher bandwidth or higher speeds so that as you put it in, the capacity is not consumed as quickly. So I think wired access, if you're going to be making an infrastructure investment, wired access is your best bet to future-proof that investment. However, that's a longer-term challenge to solve. You know, you're looking at 5 to 7 years maybe to solve a wired infrastructure problem, whereas the wireless is something that we could deploy more rapidly in the matter of a year or 18 months. We did run into some challenges, challenges with terrain. Fort Worth is a lot hillier than you might expect at first thought. There's also mature trees in a lot of these neighborhoods, which kind of interferes with the radio transmissions. So we found that we needed more locations to extend the wired internet access from into the neighborhoods. We reached out to our partners at Fort Worth ISD. They were very welcoming to us. In fact, they were trying to solve the same challenge and were very willing to partner with us. And so they allowed us to utilize some of their campuses in these neighborhoods for the wired access to end and for our wireless access to extend from. We used some of our facilities, a community center, a water tower in the Stop 6 neighborhood, but Fort Worth really helped us fill in some of the locations that were a little bit harder to cover with just radio access. So that shows you a map of those locations, and you'll see that we really did target those areas that did not have widespread home internet access and supporting those communities, providing that wireless access for them. Along the way, we created some resources to help in our community outreach and education on how to utilize the wireless networks. While we were out installing equipment in the community, we had flyers available, so if people stopped and asked questions of us, we were able to provide them some flyers on and information about what we were doing in the neighborhood. There's a web FAQs, and we are really now switching from just getting internet access available and switching to more full digital inclusion. So there are lots of elements of digital inclusion, not just the access, but having computer literacy skills and accessing it. If you're used to accessing the internet on your phone, accessing it on a laptop or tablet device might be a little bit different and require different skill sets. So how do we develop those skills for users? How do they have access to technical support, right? If you are having trouble installing software or configuring email clients or any of these normal things, how do you get support to solve that problem that you're struggling with? We provide some support through community centers, libraries. We have, if you are experiencing an outage in your neighborhood, you call our citywide call center. We can walk you through some basic troubleshooting steps, but if you need something more than that, we want to find community partners that will join with us to address the full spectrum of digital inclusion in our community. So at this point, we have deployed all of the equipment that we had initially planned, with the exception of those that were supposed to be deployed on Encore poles. Encore is the electric utility provider in our community. I don't know if you're aware, but City of Fort Worth doesn't own all of the streetlights that are in our community. We own a fair portion of them, but Encore owns the other ones. And we're trying to work with them to mount some of these wireless equipment on their poles. Ultimately, we weren't able to reach an agreement to mount equipment on that pole, so that kind of set us back and caused us to go through a redesign process of how do we put the radios in the right places but not have access to Encore poles. At this point, the Wi-Fi network is complete in all 5 neighborhoods and is live. So there are people accessing the internet on the community Wi-Fi infrastructure as we speak. There is still an issue in North Side. Councilmember Flores, 2 of the sites for Fort Worth ISD are live. North Side High School is not yet live with internet access because, well, there are some challenges at that school. The service provider came. The conduit leading into the building had collapsed, so we had to work with Fort Worth ISD to fix that facilities. And then our service provider moved on, so we had to get their attention to come back. And so, long story short, we had a little bit of a delay there, but we expect that to be up any day now at Northside High School. And then all of the neighborhoods will have access to the internet over the Wi-Fi infrastructure. We did have some challenges along the way, I'm sure, as you would expect, and as you've heard in the news, COVID created lots of challenges with staffing, having them available. The various surges affected staffing levels. As I said, there was some design challenges and rework that occurred as we learned more about this wireless technology and how to deploy it in the real world. The working towards an Encore agreement, and you'll see here in a few minutes why that was so important to us, but we spent a lot of time, literally, I'm gonna say 8 months, trying to work through an agreement to mount our equipment on Encore's poles. And it was a big blow to the project when we were not successful in doing that. Ongoing supply chain slowdowns, not just the things that have computer chips in them, but the equipment to mount radios to the poles, the wiring itself, the weatherproof enclosures were all in very short supply for quite some time. And then we had inclement weather, a couple of ice storms and some spring storms that blew through that kind of delayed us rolling out bucket trucks to hang equipment on the poles. And then this was our favorite challenge. The water tower on the east side of Fort Worth was where we were mounting some radio equipment. But as we climbed up to begin mounting, we found there was a red-tailed hawk, which is a protected species in Texas. It had created a nest and had some little birds that needed to be hatched and raised and fledged out of the nest before we could continue with our work. So that was ultimately completed just a few weeks ago in March. So here you see stop 6, where it's where the biggest impact of not being able to use Encore poles. Over on the left was our original design that incorporated Fort Worth and Encore poles. When we weren't allowed to mount on Encore poles, you can see the big gap that left in the stop 6 neighborhood. So we are going back and adding additional poles in the stop 6 area to have better coverage of that neighborhood. And we are working on that now through the month of June. Here I've listed some of the funding sources. So we started the effort using CARES Act funding, about $4.3 million for equipment and installation services. We are finishing out the project, both equipment and installation, with Arpa funds. And then we are funding recurring operations through FY26 with Arpa funds. What remains now is all the fun stuff. We are meeting with communications and public engagement this week to talk about our big press and marketing efforts, reaching out into communities and engaging them on how they can utilize this great resource that we've put out there for them. We have lots of materials that you can use at your district meetings to spread the word about the access that's available to them. So we want to make those available to you, and we're happy to come to those meetings as well and answer any questions the public may have about how they access and use the network. We're going to be monitoring and reporting on the usage. We have not had a lot of communications about this network, but already it's growing organically. We've had, over the past month, about 2,000 unique devices connecting to the network. About 500 devices each day connect and use the network so far. And as we move on with our communications efforts, that number will grow greatly, I'm sure. We are installing additional poles that the city of Fort Worth owns to help fill in some of that coverage we lost with Encore. And then we're going to be operating and maintaining that equipment throughout its life cycle through at least FY26. And as I kind of alluded to, we're working on a solution for the broadband infrastructure challenge that we have here in Fort Worth. And hopefully, as we start building out that broadband infrastructure, that will then replace this community Wi-Fi infrastructure that we've deployed on a somewhat temporary basis. So lots of exciting efforts still to come, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have for us.
Thanks, Kevin. And then you did anticipate a few things that I was going to ask you. So to be clear, and I guess, Letitia, this would be maybe a legal question. We are no longer pursuing any discussions with the Encore legal team and using their polls. Is that kaput?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and without diving too far down in the details, they wanted us to waive some of our indemnifications that we were granted by state law as a municipality under the state of Texas, and we were not willing to waive those indemnifications.
Understood. Now, you alluded to one gap that we have, and you're working on it, some technical issues there at Northside High School. Are there any other gaps in the Northside area that we need to fill in?
There are no technical gaps.
Coverage gaps is,
yeah,
is what I'm referring
looking at
to.
my assistant director. No, there's no technical gaps in Northside neighborhood.
Okay. Is it possible to maybe utilize nonprofits' facilities to cover any gaps we may have, whether it be in my district or in other districts?
Absolutely, yes. And we are actively seeking partners in the effort, not just the community Wi-Fi, but broadband in general in Fort Worth.
I'll give you a short list of some places that might be able to assist, there in the north side area that, might help. And then you also answered the question that I was going to ask as far as the push, the press push, informative and all that. I still get a lot of questions about, is it available, how to use it, that kind of thing. So that is forthcoming in short order?
Yes, yeah. Like I said, we'll be meeting with communications and public engagements.
Okay.
This week or next week and developing that push for the community, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Hey, thanks again, Kevin. I just want to say, I think while a lot of people may think this is about faster delivery, like my daughters of playing Roblox or Princess Party or Netflix, it really is about an equity issue. Delivery of education, workforce development, that sort of piece. So I'm glad to see that Como's on there and that you're working in that neighborhood. There's other parts too, and I'll advocate for District 3, Las Vegas Trail, that has the neighborhood improvement program. Now, I hope they're on that list too, when people are just struggling to pay their bills, and this is something else where their kids are trying on their phone instead of actually on a proper laptop or iPad to do their homework, which is how my daughters do most of their homework these days too. I think we have to keep doing that. You brought up Como Montessori. Is it wired there at Como Montessori? Do you know? Because they're closing, and that's where I just want to make sure that we have a plan. I know they're looking at what they'll do with that facility. I think it's still going to be part of Fort Worth ISD, but I just want to make sure that because they're closing, it doesn't mean that something's happening to that wired piece of.
No.
Okay, I just want to put that out there to make sure that y'all are having that conversation. Como Elementary is next door, so it's easily transferable. I mean, as part of having the property there.
Yeah.
But just make sure it's on y'all's radar.
Yeah, Fort Worth ISD has been really great partners with us. They've been flexible. If we have to relocate that wired connection, then that's what we'll do. But they haven't indicated that that's going to be going away anytime soon.
I just want to put that out there in case that wasn't something y'all had seen. And then the Encore piece, I think I just have to say I wasn't involved in any of the negotiations, but we have our Encore's been really great in a lot of different ways. And I think if they could have worked this out, they would have done that. But I think the limitation of the liability was a big piece for them. They couldn't do our workers having access to their lines. So I just want to put that out there that they've been good in a lot of different ways. Maybe this was a negative, but they've been good in a lot of different ways to us.
Yeah, I agree. And in all other aspects of that project, Encore was fantastic. Their engineers and management were very professional and accommodating to us. They were willing to work with us. It's just that one particular technicality that hung us up.
Thanks, Michael. Leonard, and then Chris.
Thank you, Kevin. Just a couple quick questions. Back to the map, I just wanted I think we had the map in there a couple times, but see how that was generated, because we get a lot of calls from Lake Worth that they just don't have very good coverage. And I was wondering, broadband or otherwise, if you might be able to speak to that, because this strikes me as if it indicating that they would.
Yeah, so this map was generated from the American Community Survey. It was just a product of the U.S. Census Bureau, where they actually talked to households and asked them a whole series of questions about the household. One of them is, do you have internet access at home? Is it broadband internet access? Do you have a computer to access the internet at home? And so That's reported by census block and aggregated at that level. That has been a big challenge, having very granular data on where there is good access and where there is poor access, because you could have one neighborhood with great access aggregated with 3 neighborhoods with poor access, and it kind of washes out, and you don't really get a good picture. Part of what the state of Texas is doing is getting better maps for where broadband access is available and where it's not. And so that is an effort that will begin sometime at the end of this year and give us much better. In the absence of that, we've gone and talked to existing service providers to see what kind of information they can give us. We've got maps of where there is fiber optic infrastructure already installed in Fort Worth. We've also got information that is available from Microsoft, who tracks how people using their Office 365 application and the speeds with which they can access that, and they've mapped that out. And there are some other data sets from, I want to say, Google, that are kind of similar things. They have people accessing it, and they can measure the speed with which you're accessing it and get a little bit better map of where speeds are good and where speeds are bad. We have access to that through a consultant that we've hired to help us with our broadband program. And so that is informing that broadband strategic plan that we are developing, which I'll be presenting on in a few weeks, but we do have a little bit better.
Well, maybe that answers the question. But, I guess I would follow by asking, what do we need to do to investigate better broadband penetration at Lake Worth?
Yeah, and I'll take a look specifically at Lake Worth and let you know what we've found out so far. But we are looking at improving the broadband infrastructure across the city of Fort Worth.
Okay. Thank you for that. Just one other question. So you mentioned the infrastructure, and just out of curiosity, when we are, building or redoing roads, do we lay any cable or fiber alongside the roads when that's happening as a city or any utility?
Up to this point, we have not, but that has been one of the things we have been talking about as we are making these road improvements, wastewater improvements through the bond program, for instance. Does it make sense for us to lay at least empty conduit there? Yeah. And make that.
And whose responsibility would that be, or whose task would that be, the city or someone else?
We haven't decided the approach to take, but it could be either or both, right? Yeah. But it is something that we ought to be doing as the city grows. And
yeah, for sure we should.
As we are making these infrastructure investments to include that.
And similar to that, I would think, certainly up north where we have so much development, certainly where we see a lot of development in Michael's district as well coming. My question is, when we talk to developers about impact fees, maybe David, this is a question for you. Do we ever talk to them about kind of last mile infrastructure as part of their impact fees, what they could do besides curbs and sidewalks, but lane and last mile infrastructure?
Are you asking if we could ask them to install fiber or
maybe not the fiber,
conduit?
but the actual cable itself, but
the conduit?
The conduit or something to accelerate the process.
We could certainly ask them. We can't require them to do that.
Can we require them, and why not?
Oh, we just can't right now, but could we potentially? We couldn't relate it to transportation impact fees because that only has to do with traffic capacity, vehicle capacity. So laying conduit is unrelated to that purpose for transportation impact fees.
Where does curb and sidewalk fall in for their impact fees?
So that's related to just our overall street standards. And so when you're adding those capacities, whether that's for pedestrians or vehicles, that's adding transportation capacity. Yeah, that's new capacity.
Can we make technology part of capacity?
Not for transportation impact fees, but I think separately, the city could decide, do we want to have conduit be part of our street design standards so that when you are building a street, you're putting in conduit? I think, we'd have to understand what that means and where is that appropriate and how does that relate to what's wireless versus what needs to be in the ground? Yeah.
Right. To Kevin's point, that, wireless changes quickly, the fiber not
Is
so
more,
much.
yeah.
So have we ever had that conversation before? Seems like a good idea. I don't know. Just get ahead of it and accelerate the process.
Yeah, particularly if we're going to have a user.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I have a couple questions. A few of them I forgot. But, so we actually have users that are using the Wi-Fi currently. I think you said around 2,000.
Yeah, over the last month, we've had 2,000 unique.
Do we have a database to show where that usage is coming from?
We have, so we can know which wireless access point they've connected to. And let me be clear, we're not tracking each individual device. We're really tracking aggregate information. So we can't say Kevin's device logged on at, what time is it? 2:47 on Tuesday, and then logged off at 3:47. We're not tracking at that level of information. It's really aggregate. We know counts of things and totals of things, if that answers your question.
I mean,
so we're not trying to track people, I guess.
I get that we're not trying to track people, but I guess because when you look at this map, the one that has the yellow squares on it,
this one,
diamonds are forever. No, keep going. That one. And you try to get a understanding of why certain areas have more than others areas. And so my question is, are you getting more attracted, more users in other areas that make you want to put more there? And that's kind of where I'm going with that. And so, and then my other question added to that is, how many users can log on and use that Wi-Fi? Use one.
Okay. So the decisions that drive where we put the wired access are driven by the size of the neighborhood. So North Side is the largest neighborhood in the program. I believe Rosemont or Ash Crescent is the smallest, right? So the area that we're covering, land area we're covering, is bigger or smaller. That helps drive how many wired access points we need. Also, the terrain. So if there's changes in elevation or if there's trees or other structures in the way of certain radios, that means we have to add another wired internet site. So it's really not a capacity question. It's not how many people are accessing it. It's the radio network design that drove those choices. As far as how many people can access at once, we are really trying to drive the bandwidth availability and not the total amounts that are being connected. So it's a shared access, but everybody's not downloading and uploading at the same time. I might download something 1 minute and you're downloading it the next, and we have all the bandwidth available when we're each doing those tasks. So if there's 5 people getting, and I'm just putting a number out there, 1 megabit, I don't need 5 megabits.
Okay.
Okay. So we're trying to manage the amount of bandwidth available for each device connecting.
So, well, let me. I mean, these are real questions that we probably need answers to. So if 5 people are on it versus 100 people, is the speed different?
Yeah, so the answer is no. We're trying to manage it so each time they're connecting and downloading, they're going to have 2 megabits available to them. That's what we've designed it for. So we're monitoring it as each device is downloading and uploading. They're going to have 2 megabits available to them.
Okay. You might explain that to me a little bit later.
Right.
This is not my forte, but I'm having some concerns that some areas you may have a stronger capacity that needs to use the Wi-Fi. And if all are using it at the same time, which we know they're not, but any given day they could be.
Mm-hmm.
And so it might slow it down. The other question is the marketing piece, and I know you kind of mentioned it, but if 2,000 people are already using it, how did they know that this was available to them?
Yeah, they just opened up their device. They saw neighborhood Wi-Fi advertised as one of the wireless networks and connected to it.
Okay, so when I open up and I see neighborhood Wi-Fi, I click it. There's no password that is linked to it?
No, there's a splash page that says it's City of Fort Worth Network, appropriate use. You say, okay, I agree, and then you've got access to the network, to the internet.
Okay. How, my last question, I know my partner is itching back here. Okay. How are we going to make this available or put out the word? I know you mentioned that we're going to advertise, but how? Because I think that should have been a part of the presentation.
Yeah, so we are going to work with communications and public engagements. We've got handouts that are available, right? And we're, like I said, willing to come to your neighborhood and community meetings and talk about the availability of it and how they connect to that.
Okay. Can we make those handouts available via email today or something? I mean, this is crucial for us to understand that this is available, but we don't have any way of getting it to the people and to say that.
Right. And let me be clear.
Okay.
We wanted to brief you before we started doing that big push.
Yeah.
And so that's what part of the purpose of this whole presentation was to say, okay, we're about to do the push now and you're going to be hearing about it. And so we wanted you to be aware and not just caught by surprise. I think to answer your question though, we're monitoring the usage of the network, right? So if we're seeing congestion like you're describing, if we're seeing speeds drop below what we're trying to deliver, we can add additional internet bandwidth at those sites, right?
And I'm gonna say this last thing since you said that.
Yeah.
And I know these locations were decided pre us, like Ash Crescent and North Side and all those. And I get that North Side as a name and registered community is bigger than Ash Crescent. But there are streets and neighborhoods that associates with Ash Crescent that they should, I'm telling you, probably need another diamond up there. And I think that we only chose because, well, Ash Crescent is 5 streets. That's not really, I want to use the right word, making sure that each part of the city has equity.
Okay.
Any other questions, Council Elizabeth?
Councilmember Nettles, I don't know if I want to jump into on the public push, because that's really important to me as well. It doesn't do us any good if we offer a service and no one knows about it. So I respected Kevin in our approach that we were going to do the soft launch, but I think it's really going to require us to sit down with each of you and your district directors and city communications to determine the best ways to communicate in your districts with your communities. We've also talked about working with groups like the United Way, other public service providers that are out in the community to help us with some of that outreach. But it's something that we want to get it right, so we know it's going to take some coordination with y'all around the table to make sure we're hitting the points and getting outreach effectively to the communities. And I would say, too, that it is a work in progress. There are some elements to this that it's not trial by error, but we are trying something innovative and new, and so there is an opportunity to make tweaks as we go along, and we'll look forward to sharing those kind of trials and errors and ways that we can correct the Wi-Fi connectivity program.
One more question. We both had the same question. What is the mile radius for each of these?
Well, I guess as far as boundaries, we use the neighborhood improvement program boundaries for these neighborhoods. So it aligned with the boundaries they used when they were talking about the streets and the sidewalks for those neighborhoods.
No, I think the question is, so every time we see a diamond up there, what's the radius of that reach for that particular piece of equipment? Is it a mile, 2 miles, 5 miles?
Yeah, it's not that straightforward. So you see here, this is the boundaries that we used for Stop 6 neighborhood in the neighborhood improvement program. And so those are the areas that we've targeted for coverage.
Right, but I'm asking, when you install one of these at the corner of 1st and 2nd Street, what is the reach of that particular piece of equipment? How far out does it go? I get what neighborhoods you picked, but how much does that get me? Does it give me a 1/4 mile radius, all the homes in a 1/4 mile radius? Does it get me a block? What does that get me?
Yeah, so you can kind of see here, each of these dots, you know, they're going to cover a street.
Okay.
And so we try to blanket those streets to provide a continuous coverage.
Okay, then can we go back to the diamond map?
Okay, and these diamonds, they're only showing the schools that we've used for wired access.
So a couple things about this particular map. One, I'd like to see an updated map that shows progress, not just where we partnered with schools, but across the city. Because when I look at this map, I see that we have a cluster of 3 in Northside. And I hear you say it's a large neighborhood association, and that's great. But I'm looking at the broadband percentage in the neighborhoods that it's serving, right? And you've got a cluster of 3, but then I come down to the south side and I see a whole bunch of red. And I go over to Poly and I go over to Morningside, Riverside, and I see even more red. And we've got a cluster on the east side. We have two schools that we partnered with, but it looks like we left the central city out. And so I'd like to know why Northside got 3, Rosemont got 1. But if I'm looking at that, and I understand it's a neighborhood improvement program, but if I'm looking at the broadband coverage there, it looks like that neighborhood is actually pretty well covered with broadband. And so could that diamond have been put someplace else, maybe Worth Heights Elementary School, which is a little farther north and I'm looking at and has a 21 to 40% broadband household. And so I'm a little concerned about how we initially deployed it, and I want to know what we're going to do to remedy that.
All right, yeah, the methodology we chose to make these investments was to align it with the neighborhood improvement program, right? And that's what we choose collectively and where we're making our public investments each year for the neighborhood that's chosen. But we went back and put the investments in the previous neighborhoods where we had made the neighborhood improvement program investments.
No, I get that, but is that the best metric to use? When I'm looking at the map, and for instance, I'm looking at Rosemont, and I see that Rosemont actually has pretty great coverage in comparison to the city. I mean, they're not the top, but they're pretty close. I'll tell you, they're better than, almost at the same as South Hills, and Ryan Place and Fairmount as we go up that map. But I'm looking at Worth Heights, I'm looking at JMSL, Brentmore, we've got, actually Brentmore's good, but we've got Poly, Riverside, that aren't part of the neighborhood improvement programs, but are desperately hurting for Wi-Fi, given the map that you're showing us here. And so my question is using that neighborhood improvement program as the metric, the best metric to use? Should it not be based on need all over the city?
So I would say that it may not be the best metric moving forward to use. I think as a starting point, it served us well to identify those neighborhoods and start with that infrastructure. I do think moving forward,
as a speaker.
it may not be the best way to choose. And I think that as we continue working toward developing a broadband strategic plan and getting more information on where coverage exists and what some of those gaps are, I think we do have opportunities for a better placement of equipment to meet the need.
So, yeah, I'm gonna drop back. That picture right there before the yellow diamonds is a product of the current marketplace as it means to deploy internet. We heard during the pandemic that Wi-Fi was very important, and it's one of those issues, if you didn't have Wi-Fi, didn't have internet, you weren't gonna participate. So we said, hey, let's take some of the CARES money and pilot an approach to see if we could help, right? And so, and this is purely a pilot, and we took, and I can't remember how many millions of dollars of CARES and now Arpa money to say, what do we want to pilot? Let's take the neighborhood improvement areas and do a pilot. Now we know it works, kinda, right? We still don't have the data to know how well this thing works. I'm making Kevin nervous now, right? Because we've deployed millions and millions of dollars into these neighborhoods, and now we want to see if it works. If it works, the question that it's going to come back to us is, what do we want to do in other neighborhoods, or how do we want to deploy this in a broader fashion, and how much would that cost? We're not there yet, right? We're still at the pilot. Does it work? How does it work? If we wanted to expand it, what does that mean?
Yeah. And then two things I'll add here. I know that Kevin and his staff partnered heavily in the pandemic with Fourth ISD. Some of these locations were identified based on that partnership, so we weren't duplicating efforts as they deployed funds. Is it fair to say they used a different technology than we utilized? So you did a great job coordinating there. And then the other additional piece that's very exciting for the entire state of Texas that the comptroller is currently undertaking is a broadband effort across the entire state. The comptroller had a listening session 2 weeks ago here in Fort Worth. He's doing that across Texas. You're talking about billions of dollars deployed. And so I think you'll have additional opportunities in the near term for us to partner with the state of Texas on urban deployment of broadband. And so some of that opportunity may layer on to this. It may necessitate us to abandon this for future projects and just leave it where it is for this community Wi-Fi. So I think all those things together will get us in a good place. But great work. We appreciate y'all. Thank you. Council, I think that was the last of our presentations. Yes? I don't have anything else on my agenda. My iPad died, but I think that's it. Requests for future agenda items? Yep, Leonard first.
Just one thing, if we could. It's come to our attention that we've got a lot of parking issues across the street from Dickey's, particularly on Tulsa Way. So I would just like staff to maybe reconsider the streets and the blocks that are included in the residential permit parking program across from Will Rogers and Dickey's. We have a lot of no parking signs are posted on certain streets, but people are going further into the neighborhood or neighborhoods past the designated no parking blocks, and they're parking on the street in front of residents' homes, so they don't have to pay for parking. So if we could just revisit that, that'd be terrific. Tulsa Way is, as I said, one street of particular, in particular need. Additionally, we've gotten a number of complaints related to this on parking permits that are accessible for residents. So right now, the office is open from 8 to 5 p.m., 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And there are a number of residents that are working, and not able to get to the office to get their permit. So we're wondering if we might be able to do this electronically, send the stickers, the application, that kind of thing would be really beneficial to people. Yeah, obtaining the permits, that would be terrific. Thank you.
Chris?
Yeah, and I don't know if I could add to Leonard's, because as it relates to the Dickies Arena, do we know if we have enough parking when Dickies Arena is packed out? Because I experienced some of that he's talking about. People are trying to find parking, and they're parking anywhere they can, because I don't know if we have adequate parking. So maybe that's a conversation we have with Dickies, or how they're handling that. But I have one. I would like an IR on how the police department staffs East Division. Here are the Pacifics, my Pacific ask I want to ask. A number of officers in each division, so that's the northeast, south, and west, and central. Number of officers per shift. And I want to also know how the shifts are timed. So if it's 7 to 3, 3 to 11. Also, the protocols for the officers that are about to end their shifts, that receives a call, if it's a level 1, 2, or 3. And how the department decides which officers are assigned to each division. Is it a lottery base, or is it their preference, or how we decide that? Had a couple of issues that happened in the east side, and some South Division officers had to come, which prolonged the time. And I'm really concerned on how we are staffing those. So I would love to get information on those items.
Do you have something? Go ahead.
I don't know if anybody has anything else. I just want to end on a happy note. I know this is the proper place, but I want to say that Katie Wary, my district director, had her baby yesterday. 2:08 p.m., 7 pounds, 1 ounce. Anna Hensley Wary, named after her maternal grandmother and sister, and mother and baby are doing fine.
That's great. Thank you, Mike. Yay. Carlos, do you have something?
William Johnson's already aware of this. We've been talking about this for some months. Success in the stockyards redevelopment does beget some unintended situations, and those pertain to parking and traffic. Yeah. We've been already in some level of discussions with some of the business owners and stakeholders. We both agree that we need to proceed and have a more comprehensive approach to look at this in light of what the development has done and where it's going.
And I'll add to that, maybe in the interim, as we do traffic studies and work with developers down there, that if you get on a busy Thursday through Sunday, the intersection there at Exchange in Maine, you may need additional police presence. And I don't know if that's a coordination with the PID there, but you almost can't get across the street, and you've got so much traffic back and forth. They know that, but maybe we just add that to your topic there.
Chief Noakes is also
working on it. So
I think if we're going to talk about traffic, I've heard a couple of different folks. There's always the zoo. And so maybe it just begs, instead of an IR, maybe a presentation on how we handle traffic.
avoid what happened again next year.
Just how we handle major traffic, whether it be Dickies, influx at Northside, half price day at the zoo during spring break, so that we get a better understanding on how we can coordinate with TCU games, Colonial, you name it, we got it. And I think we've all sat and kind of been frustrated as a resident, not, as a council person. So maybe a presentation from PD on what goes into the traffic management process for major events and how council can better support that effort.
Perfect. Anybody else? Okay, with that, I'm going to adjourn.